Hi, sorry. This is Dr. Patricia Coughlin, and I wanted to talk to you today about your relationship with mistakes and failures. I just read a wonderful book by a professor at Harvard, Amy Edmonson, and it's called The Right Kind of Wrong. And she's really talking about how to learn and grow from your mistakes, as well as the dangers of avoiding that, of minimizing mistakes and failures, covering them up, blaming other people, just simply blaming the patient who was impossible or so resistant or whatever, right? So your relationship to mistakes and failures are going to have a profound impact on your development over time. And when I was thinking about making this video, it dawned on me that Dr. Habib Davanloo developed intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy in response to his honest evaluation of his own work as a psychoanalyst. He became increasingly frustrated and guilty about how slow and ineffective and erratic his results were with the traditional, interpretive method. So it was having an honest look at his mistakes and failures that motivated him to try something different and to take quite a scientific approach to that, systematically trying new things, tracking patients' responses, and so on. So we can really learn from that and track our own record, right? Who are we effective with, and where do we make mistakes, and what kinds of patients or situations do we find most difficult and that we end up making mistakes. So it's only if we can acknowledge these mistakes that we can begin to dig into the why of them and learn what was or wasn't happening that contributed to that. And the more quickly you can spot a mistake and acknowledge it, the better your chances of being able to correct course. So, again, just look at how you tend to deal, right, with mistakes and failures. And do you tend to take it on as kind of a personal deficit and go to, oh, I'm no good at this, right, which is really much too global? Or again, do you tend to minimize and not even acknowledge mistakes? I'm thinking of, trainees that I've had over the years in different training groups. And I can remember one person in particular who only showed his very best tapes, right, where he was on top of his game and, really getting great results. Well, nobody can be effective all the time. So by not opening himself up to showing where he wasn't so effective, he was going to limit his growth. And so with folks like that, particularly in the third year of the core training, I will explicitly ask them to bring in tapes where they're struggling. Conversely, I've had many, many trainees who only bring in sort of their worst cases. And while it's laudable that they want to learn from their mistakes, it can also be really disheartening. And so with them, I'll say, next time, why don't you bring a tape of a session that you really feel good about and that was quite effective. So you want to have that balance. Where are you being effective? Where do you end up making mistakes? And when have you had, out and out failures? And again, why was that the case? I mean, it could be anything from, sometimes I see young trainees who are so enthusiastic and they really take on extremely complex and difficult cases much too early in their training. And that can really set them up for failure. And also, it's not really being, I don't want to say ethical, but you want to have an accurate assessment of your abilities so that you don't take on cases that you're not really competent in handling. Um, or again, another common mistake, sort of mistake on top of mistake, is just out of hand blaming the patient. They're just so resistant or difficult, and not really being open to looking at your part of it. And that's again where you're really going to get a lot of growth. So I'm thinking about a recent session I had with a patient who tended to get quite depressed and to go helpless and take on a kind of collapsed position in the face, actually, of her anger toward other people. So this is the very, very common depressive mechanism. So I was working with her on that to help her see it and then turn on it. And perhaps in my zeal to turn her on it, I used a phrase. I said, so you become this kind of sad sack. Okay, and so I didn't think too much of it at the time. And as is often the case with patients who are depressed and who take a helpless position, she was quite people pleasing and conflict avoidant. So in the next session, I detected they were quite subtle, but I detected a certain distance, a certain sluggishness in the dialogue. And so I asked her about that. I said, it seems like something is a little bit off. I'm wondering about that. And so she eventually took the leap and said, well, now that you mention it, I really was upset about you using that phrase, sad sack. I mean, it really felt kind of insulting and demeaning. Now, this is a crucial point here, and especially for ISTDP therapists, right, who can get so invested in having big breakthroughs. You might just go right to, yeah, so how do you feel toward me that I made that comment? Let's look at this anger. What do you want to do to me? And so on. But when we've actually made a mistake, which I could really understand what she was saying, I took it in and I said, well, first of all, thanks so much for telling me. And I said, I can really see how labeling you like that could really land as quite dismissive and derogatory. And this emboldened her, right? The fact that I could, listen and acknowledge and understand. And then she said, well, there were a couple of other things that she really didn't like so much. And so she felt really good about herself that she was able to actually bring these things up. And also the fact that without any kind of defensiveness or justifying, I could just acknowledge, oh, yeah, I did do that, and I can really see how that would land for you. And so that really constituted a corrective emotional experience. And the fact that I could acknowledge it and understand her, the anger went away at that point. And it reminded me of an example that I heard years ago from Dr. Michael Alpert in the days when he was quite a conventional ISTDP therapist. A patient came into the session and said, listen, I'm really angry. I mean, you left me waiting. You're 10 minutes late. And again, usually Dr. Albert would have just said, yeah, you're really angry at me. Let's see how you feel that inside, and just go for the breakthrough. But in this case, I mean, he had actually been quite shaken by something that had happened in the previous session. And he just revealed that. He said, gosh, I'm really sorry, but I'm kind of shaken by something that happened in the previous session. I was really struggling, and when it came to the end of the hour, I just felt we were in a bad place, and I wanted to make sure that the patient was in a decent state before ending. And so he wasn't justifying or rationalizing, he was simply telling this fellow what happened. And he had a profound reaction to that. The fact that Dr. Albert would open up and reveal his own vulnerability, that he's not perfect, that he struggles. And also, the patient ended up saying that, the fact that he was concerned enough about this person to extend the session and make sure that he or she was in an okay place before ending, instead of just sticking to the frame and ending no matter what, also touched him deeply. And this experience was actually a turning point in that treatment. So, again, the way we deal with our mistakes, being honest with ourselves, right? And then also honest with the patient. Or even saying, I don't know about you, but I felt like our last session was pretty bumpy and something was off. How did you feel about it, right? And really seeking their feedback. So even if they don't bring it up, if you have a sense that things went wrong and you contributed to it in some way and are open to feedback. And this, again, is one of the characteristics of the best therapists. They're humble, they're approachable, they're open to feedback. In contrast, those therapists who double down and just keep on with the same tactics, even when they're not working, tend to get very poor outcomes. So I hope this is helpful and that you'll really reflect on your mistakes and failures and your relationship with that. And also consider picking up this book. It's really terrific. Again, The Right Kind of Wrong by Amy Edmonson. Thanks. Bye-bye.